Sarah Martinez had never intended for the lie to go this far. What started as a desperate attempt to impress her new colleagues at the defense contractor firm had snowballed into something she could no longer control. Standing in the break room of Advanced Defense Solutions, she listened to Jake Thompson, a former Army Ranger, regale the group with stories of his deployment in Afghanistan. The way everyone hung on his every word, the respect in their eyes, the automatic credibility he commanded. Sarah wanted that. She had always been invisible. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she was the quiet girl who helped her grandmother run the local diner after school. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 12, leaving her and her younger brother Tommy in the care of their grandmother, Elena. Elena was a tough woman who had immigrated from Mexico decades earlier, working multiple jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Sarah learned early that life was about survival, not dreams. After high school, Sarah had wanted to join the military. She had always been drawn to stories of heroism and service, inspired by her grandfather's tales of World War II. But Tommy had been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that required expensive treatments. Elena's arthritis was getting worse, making it harder for her to work. Sarah couldn't leave. Instead, she enrolled in community college, studying computer science while working nights at the diner and weekends at a local electronics store. Years passed in a blur of responsibility and sacrifice. Sarah watched her classmates graduate and move on to bigger things while she remained stuck, caring for her family. She earned her degree eventually, but it took 6 years instead of 4. By the time she was ready to pursue her own dreams, she felt too old, too tired, too ordinary. The job at Advanced Defense Solutions had been a miracle. They needed someone with her specific combination of computer skills and security clearance, something she had obtained through her work with a previous government contractor. The pay was excellent, enough to finally get Tommy the treatments he needed and to move Elena into a nice assisted living facility. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah felt like she was moving forward, but surrounded by former military personnel, she felt like an outsider. During lunch conversations, her colleagues would share war stories, talk about brotherhood forged in combat, discuss the honor of serving their country. Sarah would sit quietly, eating her sandwich, feeling like she had nothing to contribute. She was just the girl who had stayed home, who had chosen safety over service. The lie started small. Someone had noticed a scar on her arm, a burn mark from a childhood accident at the diner, and made a casual comment about it looking like a war wound. Instead of correcting them, Sarah had simply smiled and changed the subject. But the seed was planted. Over the following weeks, she began dropping hints. She mentioned missing the teams when someone complained about their current project timeline. She made vague references to deployment food when criticizing the cafeteria's offerings. She spoke about the importance of operational security with an authority that impressed her supervisors. The more she embellished, the more respect she gained. Her opinions carried weight in meetings. People sought her advice on security protocols. She was invited to lunch with the executives, something that had never happened before. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt important, valued, heard. Jake Thompson had taken particular interest in her. One evening after work, he approached her in the parking garage. "Hey, Martinez," he said, using the surname that sounded so much more impressive than her given name. "I've been meaning to ask, what unit were you with?" Sarah's heart raced. She had researched extensively, spending hours reading about Navy SEALs, memorizing terminology, studying organizational structures. "Team 6, she said, the words coming out more confidently than she felt. It was an impressive unit, one that commanded respect, but also one shrouded in enough secrecy that details were hard to verify. Jake's eyebrows rose. "No kidding? When did you serve?" 2010 to 2015, Sarah replied, having calculated the timeline carefully. It was long enough to seem credible, but ended recently enough that she could claim some missions were still classified. "That's incredible," Jake said, his voice filled with admiration. "I heard you guys were in some serious operations during that time." "Probably can't talk about most of it," Sarah nodded gravely. "You know how it is. Some things stay buried." From that moment, her reputation was cemented. Word spread through the office that Sarah Martinez was former SEAL Team 6. The way people looked at her changed overnight. During meetings, when she suggested a security protocol, no one questioned her authority. When she spoke about risk assessment, people took notes. She was invited to speak at the company's annual conference about cybersecurity from a military perspective. The attention was intoxicating. For weeks, Sarah felt like she was living the life she had always dreamed of. She bought new clothes that projected confidence. She moved into a better apartment. She even started dating Marcus, a successful lawyer who was clearly impressed by her supposed military background. But the higher she climbed, the more dangerous the fall became. Each conversation required careful navigation. She had to remember which stories she had told to whom, which details she had shared. She created elaborate mental maps of her fictional deployments, memorized the names of real SEAL operations she claimed to have participated in. The stress was overwhelming, but Sarah convinced herself it was worth it. She was finally living the life she deserved. She was respected, valued, important. The little girl who had served burgers and coffee to truckers was gone, replaced by a warrior who had served her country with honor. 3 months into her deception, everything changed. Sarah was working late in her office, reviewing security protocols for an upcoming government contract, when her computer chimed with an email notification. The message was from the company's new senior consultant, Admiral Becca Stone, USN representative. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had heard about Admiral Stone. Everyone in the defense industry had. The woman was a legend, one of the first female admirals in the Navy, with a reputation for being both brilliant and uncompromising. She had served in some of the most classified operations of the past 3 decades and was known for her photographic memory and attention to detail. The email was brief but ominous. Ms. Martinez, I'd like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss your background and potential involvement in the Blackwater project. Please bring your service records and any relevant documentation. I look forward to our conversation. Admiral Stone. Sarah stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Service records, documentation. Things she obviously didn't have because she had never served. The Blackwater project was the company's most classified contract, worth millions of dollars and requiring the highest level of security clearance. If Admiral Stone was considering her for involvement, it meant her reputation had reached the highest levels of the company. It also meant her deception was about to be exposed. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her apartment. She thought about Tommy, now thriving with his new treatments. She thought about Elena, comfortable for the first time in decades in her assisted living facility. She thought about her job, her reputation, her relationship with Marcus. Everything she had built was about to come crashing down. She considered running. She had enough savings to disappear, start over somewhere else under a different name. But running would mean abandoning Tommy and Elena, and Sarah couldn't do that. They depended on her, just as they always had. She considered coming clean, confessing everything to Admiral Stone, and hoping for mercy. But she knew there would be none. Stolen valor was taken seriously in the military community. She would not only lose her job, but likely face legal consequences. Her security clearance would be revoked, making her unemployable in her field. As dawn broke, Sarah made her decision. She would go to the meeting. She would face whatever consequences came. But she would not go down without a fight. The next morning, Sarah dressed carefully in her most professional outfit. She gathered the few documents she had, her college transcripts, her previous employment records, her security clearance paperwork, and put them in a leather portfolio. They weren't service records, but maybe she could find a way to redirect the conversation. The walk to Admiral Stone's temporary office felt like a death march. Each step brought her closer to the end of everything she had built. She passed colleagues who nodded respectfully, having no idea that the woman they admired was a fraud. Admiral Stone's office was Spartan but imposing. The walls were lined with commendations, photographs of the Admiral with various military and political leaders, and strategic maps from conflicts around the world. Behind the desk sat a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair pulled back in a precise bun and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Martinez," Admiral Stone said, not looking up from the file she was reading. "Please have a seat." Sarah sat down, trying to project confidence despite her racing heart. The portfolio felt heavy in her hands, weighted down by the lies it couldn't support. Admiral Stone finally looked up, studying Sarah with an intensity that made her feel like she was being dissected. "I've been reviewing your personnel file," the Admiral said. "Quite impressive. Computer science degree, security clearance, excellent performance reviews. But I noticed there's a gap in your employment history from 2010 to 2015. Sarah's mouth felt dry. "Yes, ma'am. I was. Serving during that time." Serving where exactly? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Sarah knew this was the moment of truth. She could confess everything, throw herself on the Admiral's mercy, and hope for the best. Or she could continue the lie that had brought her this far. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group," Sarah said, using the official name for SEAL Team 6. "Most of my service record is classified." Admiral Stone's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "I see. And what was your rate?" Sarah had prepared for this question. "Intelligence Specialist, IS-1. "Interesting," Admiral Stone said, making a note. "Tell me about your training." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah drew on every piece of research she had done, every documentary she had watched, every article she had read. She spoke about BUD/S training, about the selection process, about the physical and mental challenges. She was careful to speak in general terms, avoiding specific details that could trip her up. Admiral Stone listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Her face revealed nothing, but Sarah felt increasingly confident. Maybe she could pull this off after all. Then Admiral Stone asked the question that changed everything. "Roll up your sleeves." Sarah blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your sleeves. Roll them up." Sarah's mind raced. She had no idea what Admiral Stone was looking for, but she couldn't refuse without seeming suspicious. Slowly, she rolled up the sleeves of her blouse, revealing her forearms. Admiral Stone studied her arms carefully, then frowned. "Stand up and remove your blazer." "Ma'am, I don't understand. Just do it." Sarah stood and removed her blazer, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Admiral Stone walked around the desk and examined Sarah's arms more closely, then stepped back with a puzzled expression. "That's interesting," the Admiral said. "You claim to have served with Dev Gru for 5 years, including multiple deployments, but you don't have the tattoo."
"Tattoo?"
Sarah asked weakly. Admiral Stone returned to her desk and pulled out a photograph. It showed a group of Navy SEALs in combat gear, their faces partially obscured but their arms visible. On each of their forearms was an intricate tattoo, a trident, surrounded by specific symbols that Sarah had never seen before. "Every member of the unit gets this tattoo upon completion of their first operational deployment," Admiral Stone explained. "It's a tradition that goes back decades. The design is unique, created by a specific artist who works exclusively with the teams. It's not something you can get at a regular tattoo parlor." Sarah stared at the photograph, her carefully constructed lies crumbling around her. She had researched everything: unit histories, training programs, operational procedures, but she had missed this one crucial detail. I don't, she stammered. Admiral Stone's expression hardened. "Ms. Martinez, have you ever served in the United States military?" The question hung between them like a sword about to fall. Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came. The weight of her deception, the months of lies, the respect she had stolen, it all crashed down on her at once. But before she could answer, Admiral Stone did something unexpected. She rolled up her own sleeve, revealing a tattoo on her forearm. It was different from the SEAL tattoo in the photograph, older, more elaborate, featuring symbols that seemed to tell a story of their own. "This," Admiral Stone said softly, "is my tattoo. I got it after my first classified operation, back when women weren't supposed to be anywhere near special operations. It's not in any manual or database. It's not something you can research online. It represents something that can't be faked or stolen." Sarah stared at the tattoo, seeing not just the ink but the history it represented, the sacrifices it symbolized, the honor it embodied. Everything she had tried to claim for herself was right there on Admiral Stone's arm. Real, earned, legitimate. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Admiral Stone said, her voice steady but not unkind. "Have you ever served in the United States military?" Sarah looked into the Admiral's eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Not anger or judgment, but understanding. It was as if Admiral Stone could see through her lies to the desperate woman beneath. the one who had spent her life caring for others and dreaming of something more. In that moment, Sarah made a choice that would change everything. "No," she whispered. "I never served, I lied about everything." The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Sarah felt her legs give way slightly, and she gripped the back of the chair to steady herself. The confession had torn through her like shrapnel, leaving her raw and exposed. Admiral Stone studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Sit down," the Admiral said quietly. Sarah collapsed into the chair, her hands shaking as she placed them in her lap. She waited for the explosion of anger, the shouting, the immediate call to security. Instead, Admiral Stone returned to her desk and closed the file she had been reading. "How long?" Admiral Stone asked. 3 months, Sarah whispered. "And before that?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "I never served anywhere. I graduated from community college, worked tech support, got my security clearance through a previous contractor job. That's it." Admiral Stone nodded slowly. "Tell me why." The simple question broke something open in Sarah's chest. "I don't know," she said, then caught herself. "That's not true. I do know. I wanted to be someone important, someone who mattered." She found herself talking, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. She told Admiral Stone about her childhood, about losing her parents, about sacrificing her dreams to care for Tommy and Elena. She spoke about feeling invisible, about watching others live the life she had always wanted, while she remained trapped by circumstances beyond her control. "I know it doesn't excuse what I did," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I stole something that doesn't belong to me. I wanted people to look at me the way they look at Jake, the way they're looking at me now. I wanted to matter." Admiral Stone listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Sarah finished, the office fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. "Do you understand what you've done?" Admiral Stone asked finally. Sarah nodded miserably. "I've committed stolen valor. I've lied to my colleagues, my supervisors, everyone. I've taken credit for sacrifices I never made." "That's part of it," Admiral Stone agreed, "but it goes deeper than that. Every person who has ever served, who has ever put their life on the line for this country, has a story, a real story, written in sweat and blood and sacrifice. When you fabricate a service record, you're not just lying about yourself. You're diminishing their truth." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She thought about Jake Thompson, who still woke up screaming from nightmares about Afghanistan. She thought about the other veterans at the company who carried invisible wounds from their service. She had trivialized their experiences by pretending to share them. "I know," she said. "I know, and I hate myself for it." Admiral Stone stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where employees were arriving for another day of work. "I've been in the military for over 30 years, she said. "I've seen courage and cowardice, honor and disgrace, truth and lies. Do you know what I've learned?" Sarah shook her head. "The worst thing about lying isn't that you deceive others. It's that you lose yourself in the process. You become so invested in maintaining the fiction that you forget who you really are." Admiral Stone turned back to face Sarah. "Who are you, really? Not the decorated war hero, not the SEAL Team 6 operator. Who is Sarah Martinez?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She had spent so many months being someone else that she had almost forgotten her real identity. I'm a woman who raised her brother after their parents died. I'm someone who worked 3 jobs to put herself through college. I'm a daughter who made sure her grandmother could live with dignity in her final years." "Go on." Sarah thought harder. "I'm a computer programmer who taught herself advanced cybersecurity because she wanted to help protect people. I'm someone who hasn't taken a real vacation in 10 years because family always came first. She paused, surprised by her own words. "I'm someone who has been serving others her entire life, just not in uniform." Admiral Stone nodded. "And is that person not worthy of respect?" The question hung in the air. Sarah had been so focused on what she wasn't, a warrior, a hero, someone with an impressive military record, that she had forgotten what she was. She was a survivor, a caregiver, someone who had made countless sacrifices for others without recognition or glory. "I never thought about it that way," Sarah admitted. Admiral Stone returned to her desk and picked up her phone. "Janet, please reschedule my 11 o'clock meeting." I'm going to be tied up longer than expected. Sarah's heart sank. This was it. Admiral Stone was calling security, or human resources, or maybe the FBI. Her career was over, her reputation destroyed. She would lose everything she had worked for, and worse, she would lose the ability to care for Tommy and Elena. But Admiral Stone didn't call security. Instead, she hung up the phone and settled back in her chair. Here's what's going to happen, she said. You're going to resign from this company effective immediately. You're going to write a letter confessing to your lies and apologizing to everyone you deceived. And you're going to accept the consequences of your actions. Sarah nodded numbly. It was better than she had hoped for, actually. At least she wouldn't be arrested. But, Admiral Stone continued, that's not all. Sarah looked up, confused. You mentioned that you got your security clearance through previous work with government contractors. That tells me you're good at what you do. Really good, or they wouldn't have trusted you with classified information. I suppose so, Sarah said uncertainly. Admiral Stone opened a different file on her desk. I've been brought in to consult on a new initiative. The government needs cybersecurity specialists who can think like the enemy, who understand that the greatest threats often come from the inside. They need people who can identify vulnerabilities before they're exploited. Sarah didn't understand where this was going. Your background in community college, working multiple jobs, supporting a family, that's not a weakness. That's evidence of resourcefulness, determination, the ability to function under pressure. The fact that you were able to maintain this deception for 3 months, researching every detail, managing every conversation, that shows a level of operational security awareness that's actually quite impressive. I don't understand, Sarah said. Admiral Stone leaned forward. I'm offering you a job. Sarah blinked. What? Not here. This company is finished for you. You burned that bridge when you decided to impersonate a Navy SEAL. But I have connections in the private sector. Companies that do legitimate security work for the government. They need people like you. People who understand both the technical aspects of cybersecurity and the human elements of deception. Sarah stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. You want to hire me after what I did? I want to hire you because of what you did, Admiral Stone corrected. Not the lying part, that was inexcusable. But the part where you identified what you wanted and went after it with complete commitment. The part where you researched extensively and paid attention to details. The part where you recognized the value of military service even if you went about claiming it the wrong way. Admiral Stone stood and walked around to the front of her desk, leaning against it casually. Sarah, I've been where you are. Not exactly. I never impersonated anyone else's service record. But I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like you don't belong, to feel like you have to prove yourself every single day. She rolled up her sleeve again, revealing the intricate tattoo. This tattoo isn't from any SEAL unit. It's from an operation that officially never happened, carried out by a team that officially didn't exist. I was the only woman on that team, and some of the men didn't think I belonged there. Sarah studied the tattoo more closely. The symbols were unlike anything she had ever seen. A combination of military insignia, ancient symbols, and modern technological elements. It was beautiful and mysterious, clearly representing something significant. The operation was in 1987, Admiral Stone continued. We were tasked with infiltrating a terrorist cell that was planning to attack military installations across Europe. The cell was led by a woman, and intelligence suggested they would be more likely to trust a female operative. Admiral Stone's voice took on a distant quality, as if she were looking back across decades. For 6 months, I lived undercover. I learned their language, adopted their customs, became someone else entirely. I had to convince them that I shared their beliefs, that I was committed to their cause. Every day was a performance, every conversation a potential death sentence if I said the wrong thing. Sarah listened, fascinated despite herself. The hardest part wasn't maintaining the cover story. It was remembering who I really was underneath it all. When you spend months being someone else, when you have to think like them, talk like them, believe like them, you start to lose yourself. I would look in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back at me. Admiral Stone touched the tattoo gently. This represents that operation, but more than that, it represents survival. Not just physical survival, but psychological survival. The ability to maintain your core identity even when everything around you is false. She looked directly at Sarah. What you did was wrong, but it took skills that are highly valued in the intelligence community. The ability to research thoroughly, to maintain operational security, to think strategically about how information flows through an organization. The fact that you were able to fool experienced military personnel for months suggests you have natural aptitude for this kind of work. Sarah shook her head. But I'm not cut out for that life. I can't handle the stress, the constant lying, the fear of being caught. Who said anything about lying? Admiral Stone asked. The best intelligence work isn't about deception. It's about understanding how deception works. It's about identifying vulnerabilities before they can be exploited. It's about thinking like someone who would try to infiltrate your organization and then developing countermeasures. She returned to her desk and pulled out a business card. There's a company called Sentinel Security Solutions. They do penetration testing for government agencies and defense contractors. Their job is to try to break into secure facilities, hack into computer systems, and identify weak points in security protocols. Then they help their clients fix those vulnerabilities. Admiral Stone handed Sarah the card. They need someone who understands both the technical side of cybersecurity and the human side of social engineering. Someone who has actually done what you just did, successfully infiltrated an organization by creating a false identity. Sarah stared at the card. You really think I could do that? Legitimately? I think you already have. What you accomplished here was essentially a months-long penetration test of this company's personnel security. You identified exactly how someone could gain trust and access by exploiting people's respect for military service. That's valuable intelligence. Admiral Stone sat back down. Here's what I propose. You resign from this position immediately and accept full responsibility for your actions. I'll speak with my contacts at Sentinel and arrange an interview. If they hire you, you'll start over with a clean slate, but this time doing legitimate work that uses your skills ethically. Sarah felt a flicker of hope for the first time since receiving Admiral Stone's email. What about Tommy and Elena? I can't afford to be out of work long. Sentinel pays well, probably better than what you're making here. And the work is important. Every vulnerability they identify, every weakness they help fix, potentially prevents real enemies from exploiting those same flaws. Admiral Stone's expression grew serious. But there are conditions. First, you have to tell them the truth about your background. All of it, including what you did here. They need to know exactly who they're hiring and why. Sarah nodded. That seemed fair. Second, you have to make things right with the people you deceived. That means personal apologies to Jake Thompson and anyone else who trusted you based on your false service record. Not just a general letter, individual, face-to-face conversations. That would be harder, but Sarah knew she deserved to face the people she had lied to. Third, you have to volunteer for a veterans organization. You need to understand what real service looks like, what real sacrifice means. You need to see the people whose experiences you appropriated and find a way to give back to them. Sarah thought about this. It would be difficult, facing real veterans, knowing what she had done. But maybe that was exactly what she needed. And finally, Admiral Stone said, you have to promise me that you'll never again pretend to be something you're not. Your real story. Growing up poor, losing your parents, sacrificing your dreams to care for your family, working your way through college, earning your expertise through hard work, that story is worth more than any fictional military service record. Tears began flowing down Sarah's cheeks again, but this time they felt different. Not tears of shame and fear, but tears of something that might have been relief. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked. Why are you giving me a second chance when I don't deserve it? Admiral Stone was quiet for a long moment. Because 30 years ago, I was a young lieutenant who felt like she didn't belong. The military was a boys' club, and I was an outsider trying to prove I was worthy of their respect. I made some poor decisions in the name of proving myself. She looked at her tattoo again. I was lucky. I had mentors who saw potential in me despite my mistakes. They gave me opportunities to channel my ambition in productive directions. I'm just paying that forward. Admiral Stone stood up. But make no mistake, this is not forgiveness. What you did was serious, and there will be consequences. Your reputation in this industry is damaged, possibly permanently. Some people will never trust you again, and you'll have to live with that. But if you're willing to do the hard work of earning redemption, there might be a path forward. Sarah stood as well, clutching the business card like a lifeline. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've made something worthwhile out of this opportunity. When you've used your skills to protect instead of deceive. When you've found a way to serve your country honestly instead of pretending you already have. Admiral Stone walked to the door and opened it. You have until end of business today to clean out your desk and submit your resignation letter. I suggest you use that time to think carefully about what you want to say to your colleagues. Sarah walked toward the door, then stopped. Admiral Stone? What was the operation? The one represented by your tattoo? Admiral Stone smiled for the first time during their conversation. That's classified. But I'll tell you this. When it was over, when we had successfully prevented a major terrorist attack, I realized something important. The greatest honor isn't in the recognition you receive, but in the service you provide. The real heroes are often invisible, working in the shadows to keep others safe. She placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Your grandmother, working multiple jobs to raise her grandchildren after losing her own daughter. You, sacrificing your dreams to care for your family. That invisible service. That's what real heroism looks like. You just have to learn to see it. As Sarah walked out of Admiral Stone's office, she felt like she was leaving one life behind and stepping into another. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with difficult conversations and hard truths. But for the first time in months, she felt like she was walking towards something real. Sarah spent the rest of the morning sitting in her office, staring at a blank document on her computer screen. She had tried to write her resignation letter a dozen times, but each attempt felt inadequate. How do you explain the inexplicable? How do you apologize for the unforgivable? The business card from Admiral Stone sat on her desk like a talisman. Sentinel Security Solutions. Sarah had looked up the company online and found exactly what Admiral Stone had described. A legitimate cybersecurity firm that specialized in penetration testing and security assessments for government agencies. Their website featured testimonials from satisfied clients and case studies of vulnerabilities they had discovered and helped fix. It looked like exactly the kind of work Sarah had always dreamed of doing. Important work, work that mattered. But first, she had to face the consequences of her deception. At 11:30, Jake Thompson knocked on her office door. Sarah's stomach clenched as she looked up to see him standing in the doorway with a concerned expression. Hey, Sarah, everything okay? You missed the project meeting this morning. Sarah gestured for him to come in and close the door. Jake sat down across from her desk, his brow furrowed with worry. Jake, Sarah began, her voice shaky, I need to tell you something. Something that's going to change how you think about me. Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah confessed everything. She told Jake about the lie, about the months of deception, about the fictional service record she had created. She watched his expression change from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like hurt. You never served? He asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. Never. I made it all up. Jake was silent for a long time, processing this information. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Why? He asked. Why would you do that? Sarah had been asking herself the same question since her conversation with Admiral Stone. Because I wanted what you have, she said honestly. The respect, the credibility, the sense that your experiences matter. I wanted people to listen to me the way they listen to you. Jake's eyes flashed with anger. You think I got this respect for free? You think my experiences are some kind of prize you can just claim? No, Sarah said quickly. I know they're not. I know what you went through was real, and what I did diminishes that. I'm sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry. Jake stood up abruptly and paced to the window. Do you have any idea what it's like over there? What we actually go through? Sarah remained silent, knowing anything she said would only make things worse. I lost 3 men in my unit, Jake continued, his voice tight with emotion. Good men. Friends. I still see their faces every night when I try to sleep. I still hear the sound of that IED going off. I still wake up in cold sweats thinking I'm back in that convoy. He turned to face her. And you thought you could just pretend that happened to you? You thought you could take credit for their sacrifice? I never claimed to have served in the army, Sarah said weakly. I said I was Navy. It doesn't matter, Jake exploded. Military service is military service. Combat is combat. You trivialized all of it by pretending it was something you could just research and role-play. Sarah felt each word like a physical blow. She deserved his anger, she knew that. But it still hurt to see the respect in his eyes replaced by disgust. "You're right," she said. "Everything you're saying is right. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I'm resigning. Today, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." Jake studied her for a moment. "What changed? Why are you coming clean now?" Sarah told him about her meeting with Admiral Stone, about being caught in her lie, about the opportunity she had been offered. Jake listened without interruption. "So you're only confessing because you got caught," he said when she finished. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "I wish I could say I was going to come forward on my own, but I wasn't. I was in too deep, too scared of the consequences." Jake appreciated her honesty, if nothing else. "What happens now?" "I don't know," Sarah said. "I have a chance at a new job, but I have to tell them the truth about what I did, and I have to apologize to everyone I lied to. Starting with you." Jake was quiet for a long time. Finally, he sat back down. "You know what the worst part is?" he said. "I actually liked you. I thought we understood each other. I thought you knew what it was like to serve something bigger than yourself." "I do know what that's like," Sarah said. "Just not in the way I pretended." Jake raised an eyebrow. Sarah found herself talking about her real life again, about Tommy, about Elena, about the years of sacrifice and responsibility. As she spoke, she saw Jake's expression soften slightly. "That's service too," he said when she finished. "Not military service, but service nonetheless. Why wasn't that enough? Why did you need to pretend to be something else?" It was a question Sarah was still trying to answer, because nobody respects that kind of service. Nobody gives you credit for staying home, for taking care of family, for choosing responsibility over adventure. There are no medals for changing your brother's bandages or working 3 jobs to pay for your grandmother's medication. Jake considered this. "You're not wrong about that. Society does value some kinds of service more than others. But that doesn't excuse what you did." "I know," Sarah said. "I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm just trying to understand it myself." Jake stood up again. "I can't forgive you right now. Maybe someday, but not now. What you did feels like theft to me. You stole something that belongs to people who earned it." Sarah nodded. "I understand. But," Jake continued, "I don't want to see you destroyed by this either. People make mistakes, sometimes big ones. What matters is what you do next." He paused at the door. "That job Admiral Stone mentioned. It sounds like something you could actually be good at. If you're really committed to making this right, maybe that's your path forward." After Jake left, Sarah sat alone in her office, feeling emotionally drained. But she wasn't done yet. Over the next several hours, she had similar conversations with other colleagues who had befriended her based on her supposed military background. Each conversation was difficult in its own way. Some people were angry, like Jake. Others seemed more hurt than angry, feeling personally betrayed by someone they had trusted. A few were simply confused, unable to understand why she would create such an elaborate lie. The hardest conversation was with her supervisor, David Chen. David was a former Marine who had taken Sarah under his wing, mentoring her and advocating for her advancement within the company. When Sarah confessed her deception, she watched something die in his eyes. "I vouched for you," he said quietly. "I recommended you for the Blackwater project based on your supposed military experience. I put my reputation on the line for you." Sarah had no response to that. She had betrayed not just her colleagues, but the people who had believed in her and supported her career. "I'll need your resignation letter and your security badge," David said. "You'll be escorted out of the building by the end of the day." Sarah nodded, having expected this. "For what it's worth," David continued, "your technical work was excellent. If you had just been honest about your background from the beginning, you would have been fine. We hire plenty of people without military experience. We care about competence, not just credentials." This revelation hit Sarah harder than all the anger and disappointment. She had destroyed her career, chasing something she hadn't even needed. By 4 p.m., Sarah had cleaned out her desk and submitted her resignation letter. The letter was brief but honest. "To my colleagues at Advanced Defense Solutions, I am resigning my position effective immediately due to personal misconduct. I have misrepresented my background, specifically claiming military service that I never performed. This deception was inexcusable and has violated the trust you placed in me. I take full responsibility for my actions and apologize to everyone who was affected by my dishonesty. I will not attempt to contact any clients or work on any ongoing projects. I wish the company continued success. Sarah Martinez. As Sarah was escorted to her car by security, she saw several colleagues watching from the windows. Some looked angry, others disappointed. A few seemed simply curious about the drama unfolding. None looked sad to see her go. Driving home, Sarah felt like she was in a strange limbo between her old life and whatever came next. She had burned every bridge at Advanced Defense Solutions, but Admiral Stone had given her a potential path forward. The question was whether she could walk that path honestly. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment and made the hardest phone call of her life. "Tommy, it's Sarah. I need to tell you something." Her brother listened in stunned silence as Sarah explained what had happened. When she finished, there was a long pause. "You pretended to be in the military?" Tommy asked finally. "Yes, but you always said the military was important. You said Grandpa's service in World War II was one of the most important things about him." "It was," Sarah said. "That's what made what I did so wrong." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to be okay? Do you have another job lined up?" Even facing the consequences of her lies, Tommy's first concern was for her well-being. It reminded Sarah of why she had made all those sacrifices in the first place. "Maybe," Sarah said, "there's a possibility, but it would mean starting over, and I'd have to tell them about what I did." "Good," Tommy said, surprising her. "Good. Sarah, you've been taking care of everyone else your whole life. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself." But honestly this time. After they hung up, Sarah called Elena. Her grandmother's reaction was different. Not disappointed, exactly, but puzzled. "Mija," Elena said in her accented English, "why did you think you needed to be someone else? You are already someone important." "I didn't feel important, abuela." "That is because you have been too busy working to see yourself clearly. When your parents died, you became the mother to your brother. When I got sick, you became my caretaker. When Tommy needed treatments, you found a way to pay for them. You think this is not important?" Sarah found herself crying again. "But it's not glamorous. Nobody writes stories about people like me." "No," Elena agreed. "But God sees." "I see. Tommy sees. We know who you are." That night, Sarah barely slept. She kept thinking about Admiral Stone's words, about the difference between stealing honor and earning it, about the invisible service that goes unrecognized. She thought about her real story, not the fictional military career she had invented, but the actual life she had lived. The next morning, Sarah called the number on the business card Admiral Stone had given her. A receptionist answered. "Sentinel Security Solutions. How may I help you?" "I'd like to speak to someone about employment opportunities. Admiral Stone suggested I contact you." "One moment, please." After a brief hold, a man came on the line. "This is Robert Kane. Admiral Stone mentioned you might be calling. When can you come in for an interview?" "Anytime you'd like," Sarah said, "but I need to be upfront about something. I need to tell you about a serious mistake I made at my previous job. Admiral Stone mentioned there were some complications in your background. We can discuss that when you come in. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I'll be there." After hanging up, Sarah spent the rest of the day researching Sentinel Security Solutions more thoroughly. She learned about their methodology for penetration testing, their approach to social engineering assessments, their philosophy about ethical hacking. The more she read, the more interested she became. This was work that could make a difference. Instead of pretending to be a warrior, she could actually help defend against real threats. Instead of stealing valor, she could earn it through honest service. But first, she had to survive the interview and convince Robert Kane that someone who had lied about her background for months could be trusted with legitimate security work. As Sarah prepared for the meeting, she made a promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would tell the complete truth. No embellishments, no omissions, no attempts to make herself look better than she was. If Sentinel Security Solutions was going to hire her, they would hire the real Sarah Martinez. Flaws and all. The woman who had raised her brother after their parents died. The woman who had worked 3 jobs to put herself through college. The woman who had made a terrible mistake but was trying to find a way to make it right. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she knew exactly who that woman was. The offices of Sentinel Security Solutions occupied the top 3 floors of a nondescript building in downtown Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early for her 2 p.m. interview, using the extra time to study the building's security measures. Old habits from her research into military protocols made her notice things. The placement of cameras, the type of card readers at the elevator bank, the way the receptionist positioned herself to observe both the entrance and the elevator doors. Robert Kane met her in the lobby at exactly 2 p.m. He was a tall man in his 40s, with graying temples and the kind of quiet intensity that Sarah had learned to recognize in former military personnel. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his manner professional but approachable. "Martinez," he said, "thank you for coming in. I'm looking forward to our conversation." As they rode the elevator to the 15th floor, Kane made small talk about the traffic and the weather, but Sarah could feel him observing her, taking her measure. She had dressed conservatively, a navy blue pantsuit, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. She wanted to project competence and honesty, the antithesis of the deceptive person she had been. Kane's office was sparse but functional, with a view of the Potomac River and walls lined with cybersecurity certifications and commendations from various government agencies. A coffee table in the corner held trade publications and what appeared to be technical manuals for security systems. "Please, have a seat," Kane said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Can I get you anything to drink? Water? Coffee? Water would be great, thank you." Kane poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on a side table, then settled into his chair. He opened a folder that Sarah assumed contained her limited personnel information. "Admiral Stone speaks very highly of your technical abilities," Kane began. "She mentioned that you have an interesting background and that there were some complications at your previous position that we should discuss." Sarah had rehearsed this moment dozens of times in her mind, but now that it was here, her mouth felt dry. "Mr. Kane, before we discuss anything else, I need to tell you exactly what happened at Advanced Defense Solutions. Admiral Stone said I needed to be completely honest, and I intend to be." Kane leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral. "I'm listening." Sarah took a deep breath and began. She told Kane everything: the lie about military service, the months of deception, the research she had done to maintain her cover story, the way she had exploited people's respect for veterans. She explained how Admiral Stone had caught her, how she had confessed, and how she had resigned in disgrace. Kane listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. His face revealed nothing about what he was thinking. When Sarah finished, the office fell silent except for the sound of traffic from the street below. "That's quite a story," Kane said finally. "It's the truth," Sarah replied. "All of it. I know it doesn't make me look good, but Admiral Stone said you needed to know who you'd be hiring." Kane stood and walked to his window, looking out at the river. "Ms. Martinez, do you know what we do here at Sentinel? Penetration testing, security assessments. You try to find vulnerabilities before the bad guys do." Kane nodded. "That's part of it, but the core of what we do is something called social engineering assessment. Do you know what that means?" Sarah had researched the term. "It means testing whether people within an organization can be manipulated into revealing information or providing access they shouldn't." "Exactly." Kane turned back to face her. "Most people think cybersecurity is about firewalls and encryption and technical barriers, but the reality is that the weakest link in any security system is always human. People want to be helpful. They want to trust others. They make assumptions based on appearances and credentials." He returned to his desk. "What you did at Advanced Defense Solutions, creating a fictional military background, researching the details extensively, maintaining operational security about your deception, exploiting people's respect for veterans, that was essentially a months-long social engineering attack." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "I know how terrible that sounds." "Actually," Kane said, "from a technical perspective, it was quite impressive." Sarah blinked in surprise. Kane opened his laptop and pulled up what appeared to be a case study. 6 months ago, we were hired by a major defense contractor to assess their personnel security. They were concerned about the possibility of foreign agents infiltrating their organization by posing as veterans or military contractors. He turned the screen towards Sarah. The document outlined a hypothetical scenario remarkably similar to what she had actually done. Our team spent weeks developing this scenario, Kane continued. We researched military units, created fictional service records, identified the kind of background story that would be most likely to gain trust and credibility. Then we sent in one of our operatives to see if he could successfully infiltrate the organization. Sarah studied the document. What happened? He was caught on day 3. The company's HR department had procedures in place to verify military service records. They caught the discrepancies immediately. Kane closed the laptop. You, on the other hand, maintained your cover for 3 months at a company filled with actual veterans. You fooled people who had real military experience. You gained access to classified projects and sensitive information. From a technical standpoint, it was a remarkably successful operation. Sarah didn't know how to respond to this, but it was wrong. I wasn't trying to test their security, I was just trying to get ahead. I understand that, Kane said, and the ethical implications of what you did are serious. But the skills you demonstrated, the attention to detail, the ability to maintain a complex cover story, the understanding of how organizational psychology works, those are exactly the skills we need for our legitimate assessments. Kane pulled out another file. Tell me about your technical background. Admiral Stone mentioned you have cybersecurity experience. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah discussed her education and work history. She explained how she had taught herself advanced programming languages, how she had earned her security clearance, how she had worked on various government contracts. Kane asked detailed technical questions about network security, penetration testing methodologies, and social engineering techniques. Your technical knowledge is solid, Kane concluded, and your understanding of social dynamics is clearly excellent, even if you used it unethically. But I have to ask, if we hire you, how do we know you won't lie to us the way you lied to your previous employer? It was the question Sarah had been dreading, but also the one she had prepared for most carefully.
You don't, she said honestly.
You can't know for certain. All I can tell you is that I've learned what happens when you build your career on lies. I've seen how it destroys relationships and trust. I've experienced the stress of trying to maintain a false identity. I never want to go through that again. Sarah leaned forward. Mr. Kane, I spent 3 months pretending to be someone I wasn't, and it nearly destroyed me. I don't want to pretend anymore. I want to use my real skills to do real work that actually helps people. Kane made more notes. What would you say to someone who argued that we can't trust you because you've demonstrated a willingness to engage in elaborate deceptions? I'd say they're right to be cautious, Sarah replied. But I'd also point out that the same skills that made me good at deception could make me good at detecting deception in others. I know how social engineering attacks work because I've essentially conducted one. I understand the psychological techniques that manipulate people because I've used them. She paused, choosing her words carefully. There's a difference between someone who lies because they're fundamentally dishonest and someone who lies because they're desperate to escape a situation they feel trapped in. I was the second type. Now that I have a chance for honest work that uses my actual abilities, I don't need to lie anymore. Kane studied her for a long moment. Admiral Stone mentioned that you have family obligations, a brother with medical needs and an elderly grandmother. Yes, sir. That was part of what drove me to lie in the first place. I felt like I had to prove myself quickly to secure a high-paying job. But lying ultimately put all of that at risk anyway. And you understand that this job would require travel? Sometimes extensive travel for weeks at a time? Sarah nodded. My brother is doing much better now, and my grandmother is in a good assisted living facility. I have more flexibility than I used to. Kane closed his files. Ms. Martinez, I'm going to be frank with you. What you did at Advanced Defense Solutions was serious. Stolen valor is not something the security community takes lightly. If we hire you, there will be people in this industry who will never trust you again. Sarah felt her heart sink. However, Kane continued, Admiral Stone's recommendation carries a lot of weight with me. And your technical qualifications are strong. Most importantly, your experience, both your legitimate cybersecurity background and your unethical but successful social engineering operation, gives you insights that could be valuable for our work.
He stood up,
I'd like you to meet some other members of our team. Are you available for the rest of the afternoon? Over the next 3 hours, Sarah met with various Sentinel employees. She spoke with the technical team about penetration testing methodologies, with the social engineering specialists about psychological manipulation techniques, and with the project managers about client relations and operational security. Each conversation was challenging in its own way. The technical team tested her knowledge with detailed questions about network vulnerabilities and exploit development. The social engineering team asked her to analyze various scenarios and identify potential weaknesses in personnel security. The project managers grilled her about her ethics and her ability to maintain client confidentiality. The most difficult conversation was with Maria Santos, a former FBI agent who led Sentinel's counterintelligence team. "So you successfully impersonated a Navy SEAL for 3 months," Maria said without preamble. "Tell me how you did it." Sarah walked Maria through her methodology, the research phase, the development of her cover story, the techniques she used to deflect detailed questions, the way she leveraged other people's assumptions to avoid having to provide specific information. Maria took extensive notes. "You mentioned that you studied videos and documentaries to learn military terminology and culture. What other sources did you use?" Sarah listed her research sources: military forums, news articles about special operations, even fiction books written by former SEALs. She explained how she had cross-referenced different sources to ensure consistency in her story. "And you never considered that someone might actually verify your claims?" Maria asked. "I knew it was a risk," Sarah admitted, "but I also knew that military records are often classified or difficult to access. I was gambling that people would take me at my word, especially if I seemed knowledgeable and deflected detailed questions." Maria leaned back. "From a counterintelligence perspective, your operation was surprisingly sophisticated. You identified the target organization's cultural values, respect for military service, and crafted an identity that would exploit those values. You researched extensively to build a believable cover story. You practiced operational security by keeping your story simple and avoiding contradictions." She paused. "Of course, you also made several mistakes that a trained operative wouldn't have made. You didn't establish a complete backstory with verifiable elements. You didn't develop contacts who could vouch for your service. And you didn't have an exit strategy for when your cover was blown." Sarah absorbed this feedback. "So what you're saying is that I was good enough to fool civilians, but not good enough to fool professionals?" "Something like that," Maria agreed. "But the fact that you identified these techniques instinctively, without training, suggests you have natural aptitude for this kind of work." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah began to understand what Sentinel was really evaluating. They weren't just assessing her technical skills or her honesty about her past mistakes. They were trying to determine whether she could channel her natural abilities for deception and manipulation into legitimate security work. By 6 p.m., Sarah had met with everyone Kane wanted her to talk with. She sat in the conference room, emotionally drained but cautiously optimistic. The conversations had been challenging, but she felt like she had been honest about both her abilities and her failures. Kane returned to the conference room with several other team members. "Miss Martinez," he said, "we've discussed your qualifications and your background extensively. We're prepared to offer you a position with Sentinel, subject to a successful completion of our training program and a probationary period." Sarah felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "The position is Social Engineering Assessment Specialist," Kane continued. "You would work with our team to design and execute tests of our clients' personnel security. You would help identify vulnerabilities in how organizations handle social engineering attacks and develop recommendations for improvement." Maria Santos spoke up. "But there are conditions. First, you'll be subject to enhanced monitoring for your first year. All of your work will be reviewed by senior staff. All of your client interactions will be supervised." Sarah nodded. That seemed reasonable. "Second," Kane added, "you'll be required to undergo extensive ethics training. We need to be absolutely certain that you understand the difference between legitimate security testing and illegal impersonation. And third," said another team member Sarah had met earlier, "you'll need to complete a comprehensive background investigation. We need to verify every aspect of your real background, education, work history, family situation, everything. No more secrets, no more hidden information." Sarah agreed to all of the conditions. After months of living with the stress of maintaining lies, the prospect of complete honesty felt liberating. "There's one more thing," Kane said. "Admiral Stone mentioned that you need to make things right with the people you deceived. We'd like you to document those efforts as part of your probationary period. We need to see that you're serious about taking responsibility for your actions." Sarah thought about the difficult conversations still ahead of her with Jake Thompson, with her other former colleagues, with the veterans organizations Admiral Stone had suggested she volunteer with. "I understand," she said. "When do I start?" Kane smiled for the first time during the interview. "Monday morning. Welcome to Sentinel Security Solutions, Ms. Martinez. We're looking forward to seeing what you can do with your talents when you use them honestly." As Sarah left the building, she felt like she was stepping into a completely different life. The job at Sentinel wouldn't erase what she had done at Advanced Defense Solutions, but it offered her a chance to transform her mistakes into something constructive. For the first time since Admiral Stone had called her into that fateful meeting, Sarah allowed herself to hope that redemption might actually be possible. 1 year later, Sarah Martinez stood in the parking lot of the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Richmond, Virginia, watching as volunteers unloaded supplies from a large truck. It was a crisp Saturday morning in October, and the annual Veterans Appreciation event was in full swing. Sarah had been volunteering with the organization for 8 months now, fulfilling one of Admiral Stone's conditions for her second chance. As she helped carry boxes of donated clothing into the building, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that devastating day in Admiral Stone's office. The work at Sentinel Security Solutions had proven to be everything she had hoped for and more. She was using her skills legitimately, helping organizations protect themselves against the kind of deception she had once practiced. Her first assignment had been with a major technology company that was concerned about industrial espionage. Sarah had worked with the Sentinel team to design a comprehensive test of the company's personnel security. They had attempted to gain access to sensitive information through various social engineering techniques, impersonating IT support staff, posing as vendors, even creating fake emergency scenarios to see if employees would bypass security protocols. The results had been sobering. In 3 weeks of testing, the Sentinel team had successfully obtained passwords from 12 employees, gained physical access to restricted areas on 7 occasions, and convinced staff members to plug unknown USB devices into their computers on multiple occasions. Sarah's role had been to analyze the human psychology behind these failures and develop training programs to help employees recognize and resist social engineering attempts. It was satisfying work in a way that her previous job had never been. Instead of exploiting vulnerabilities for personal gain, she was identifying them to help make organizations more secure. Instead of lying about her background, she was using her real experiences, both positive and negative, to educate others about the dangers of deception. The training program at Sentinel had been rigorous. Sarah had spent months learning the legal and ethical boundaries of penetration testing, studying the regulations that govern security assessments for government contractors, and practicing the communication skills needed to deliver difficult feedback to clients. Maria Santos had been particularly demanding, requiring Sarah to demonstrate not just technical competence, but genuine understanding of the ethical implications of her work. The difference between what we do and what criminals do, Maria had explained during one training session, is not just that we have permission, it's that our goal is to strengthen security, not exploit it. Every test we conduct, every vulnerability we identify, every recommendation we make has to serve the legitimate security interests of our client. Sarah had taken those lessons to heart. In her work with clients, she was scrupulous about staying within the bounds of their engagement agreements. She documented every test, every finding, every interaction. She had become almost obsessively transparent, as if trying to make up for the months of deception in her previous job. The probationary period had ended 3 months ago, with Sarah receiving glowing reviews from both clients and colleagues. Robert Kane had praised her technical skills, her ethical development, and her ability to work effectively with teams. Most importantly, he had noted that she had successfully completed all of Admiral Stone's requirements for her redemption. The hardest part had been the personal apologies Admiral Stone had required. Sarah had tracked down every person she could remember lying to at Advanced Defense Solutions. requesting individual meetings to confess her deception and apologize for her actions. Some people, like Jake Thompson, had eventually forgiven her. Others had remained angry and suspicious. A few had refused to see her at all. Jake had been particularly challenging. Their first meeting after Sarah's resignation had been tense and uncomfortable. Jake had listened to her apology but made it clear that forgiveness would take time. "I understand why you did it," he had said. "I can even understand the desperation that led to it. But understanding isn't the same as forgiving. You took something that belonged to all of us who served, and you used it for your own benefit. That's not something I can just get over." It had taken months of consistent volunteer work with veterans organizations before Jake began to soften. Sarah had started volunteering at the VA Medical Center, helping with administrative tasks and providing computer support for veterans applying for benefits. She had worked with a non-profit organization that helped homeless veterans find housing and employment. She had even participated in a program that provided technology training for disabled veterans. The work was often difficult and sometimes heartbreaking. Sarah met veterans struggling with PTSD, with physical disabilities, with the challenge of transitioning from military to civilian life. She saw the real cost of military service, not the glorified version she had appropriated for herself, but the complex reality of sacrifice and struggle. Through this work, Sarah began to understand what Admiral Stone had meant about different kinds of service. The veterans she worked with had served their country in uniform, but there were many others serving in different ways. Social workers helping at-risk youth, teachers working in underserved communities, caregivers supporting elderly or disabled family members. Service wasn't about the recognition you received. It was about the contribution you made. 6 months into her volunteer work, Jake had contacted her unexpectedly. "I wanted you to know that I've been hearing good things about your work at the VA," he had said during a brief phone call. "Maria Rodriguez mentioned that you've been helping her father with his disability paperwork." Sarah remembered Maria Rodriguez, a former colleague at Advanced Defense Solutions whose father was a Vietnam veteran dealing with health issues related to Agent Orange exposure. Sarah had spent several evenings helping him navigate the complex VA bureaucracy to get the care he needed. "It was the least I could do," Sarah had replied. "Maybe," Jake had said, "but you're doing it anyway. That means something." Their relationship would never be the same as it had been when Sarah was living a lie, but they had developed a mutual respect based on honesty rather than deception. Jake had even referred a friend to Sentinel when his company needed security testing. As Sarah worked at the veterans event, she reflected on the other changes in her life over the past year. Her relationship with Marcus, the lawyer who had been impressed by her fictional military service, had ended quickly after her resignation from Advanced Defense Solutions. He had been more interested in the idea of dating a former Navy SEAL than in the reality of dating Sarah Martinez. When the lie was exposed, his interest evaporated immediately. But Sarah had found something more meaningful in her volunteer work. David Kim was a social worker at the VA Medical Center, a former Army medic who had transitioned to civilian healthcare after being wounded in Iraq. He was quiet and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor and a genuine commitment to helping others. He had known about Sarah's background from the beginning. She had been completely honest about her past when they first met, and he appreciated her efforts to make amends for her mistakes. "I've seen people make worse decisions for better reasons," David had told her during one of their early conversations. "What matters is what you do next." Their relationship was still new, but it was based on complete honesty and mutual respect. David understood the complexities of military service and civilian transition in ways that Marcus never could. He also appreciated Sarah's technical skills and her commitment to her family responsibilities. Tommy was thriving with his new treatments, well enough to have started college part-time while continuing his medical care. Elena had settled comfortably into her assisted living facility, where she had made friends and was enjoying activities she had never had time for while working multiple jobs. Sarah's financial stability at Sentinel had allowed her to provide for both of them without the stress that had driven her to lie in the first place. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah had rebuilt her relationship with Admiral Stone. The Admiral had checked in with her periodically throughout the year, monitoring her progress and offering guidance. Their conversations had evolved from formal check-ins to genuine mentorship. "You've done well," Admiral Stone had told her during their most recent meeting. "The work you're doing at Sentinel is valuable, and the volunteer work shows genuine commitment to making amends. But I want you to understand that redemption is not a destination. It's a daily choice to do better than you did before. Admiral Stone had shared more about her own background during these conversations. The classified operation represented by her tattoo had been more complex and morally ambiguous than Sarah had imagined. Admiral Stone had spent months undercover, living a false identity, forming relationships with people she ultimately betrayed when the mission required it. The difference, Admiral Stone had explained, was that I was serving something larger than myself. I was willing to sacrifice my personal comfort and even my personal integrity for a mission that would save lives. What you did was the opposite. You sacrificed your integrity for personal gain. But Admiral Stone had also acknowledged the similarities. The skills required are often the same. The ability to research thoroughly, to maintain operational security, to understand human psychology. These are valuable capabilities, whether they're used ethically or unethically. The key is ensuring they serve the right purpose. Now, as Sarah helped set up registration tables for the veterans event, she felt like she finally understood what purpose looked like. The work at Sentinel allowed her to use her technical skills to protect organizations from real threats. The volunteer work at the VA allowed her to give back to the community she had wronged. The honest relationships she had built with David, with her rebuilt friendships from work, with the veterans she served, were based on who she really was rather than who she pretended to be. Admiral Stone arrived at the event around noon, wearing civilian clothes but still carrying herself with unmistakable military bearing. She had been invited to speak about women's roles in military service, part of an educational program that accompanied the appreciation event. Sarah approached her nervously. Despite their improved relationship, she still felt the weight of Admiral Stone's initial judgment. "Admiral Stone," Sarah said, "thank you for coming." Admiral Stone smiled, something that still surprised Sarah after their intense first meeting. "Martinez, I wouldn't miss it. How are things going at Sentinel?" "Very well. We just finished a major assessment for the Department of Defense. I was able to identify several social engineering vulnerabilities that could have been exploited by foreign intelligence services." "Excellent. And how are your volunteer responsibilities here?" Sarah gestured toward the registration area where several veterans were checking in for services. "Good. We're helping about 50 veterans today with everything from disability paperwork to job training resources. I've been working particularly with technology training, helping veterans learn skills they can use in civilian careers." Admiral Stone nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of contribution that matters. You're using your real skills to provide real value." They walked together through the event, observing the various services being provided. Sarah introduced Admiral Stone to several of the veterans she had been working with, including Maria Rodriguez's father and a homeless veteran named Marcus Thompson, who Sarah had helped find housing and employment. "This is Sarah," Marcus told Admiral Stone. "She helped me figure out how to apply for jobs online. I start work at a computer repair shop next week." Admiral Stone shook Marcus's hand. "That's wonderful. Congratulations on the new job." As they walked away, Admiral Stone turned to Sarah. "Do you see what just happened there?" Sarah wasn't sure what the Admiral meant. "Marcus Thompson didn't thank you for your service. He thanked you for your help. That's real recognition based on real contribution. It's worth more than a dozen stolen salutes." Later, during Admiral Stone's presentation about women in military service, Sarah sat in the audience listening to stories about real courage and real sacrifice. Admiral Stone spoke about the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated field, about the additional pressure to prove herself worthy of respect, about the temptation to adopt masculine personas rather than finding strength in authentic identity. "The greatest service," Admiral Stone concluded, "is not the service that gets the most recognition. It's the service that makes the greatest difference. Sometimes that service happens on a battlefield. Sometimes it happens in a hospital. Sometimes it happens in a classroom, or a government office, or even a family home. What matters is not the uniform you wear, but the purpose you serve." After the presentation, Sarah approached Admiral Stone again. "Admiral," she said, "I wanted to thank you. Not just for the job opportunity, but for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself." Admiral Stone considered this. "What I saw was potential both for good and for harm. You had demonstrated remarkable capabilities, but you were using them destructively. What I hoped was that you might learn to use.